Hi and welcome to the channel. Now today's video is about amplifiers and particularly the year 1977, which some people would say was in the golden period of amplifiers and receivers back then. So like I say, today's amplifiers, I'm going to have another video about receivers. This is from a magazine called HiFi Choice. I've took all these excerpts from. I think it'd be interesting. Now you may want to look. Now I'm not going to mention everything. It's going to have loads of tests, it's going to have loads of writes up, loads of writing. Now any of you with phones or tablets are probably going to come back and say, well, I can't see much, Mick, I've got the picture, but I can't read any of the writing or anything like that. But I think if you're interested in buying one of these and maybe picking out one from the other, because these are quite prominent, these come up quite a lot on eBay, and some of these are quite recommended and known now to people to look out for maybe, and you know, some picks for the lower budget. Don't forget we're talking about lower budget here. These retail from about £90 to £200 back then, and probably what you're going to pick them up for now these days. Still held, you know, some of these are still held, quite, you know, I'll say in high regard, but quite, you know, well known kind of thing. Like I say, you may not be able to see the full description. I'm going to do a little commentary over the top, talk just a very brief commentary of what they say about these amplifiers, but it's not everything, like I say. And right at the end of the video, you're going to get the little captions that I've read out, plus some test results as well. But also, like I say, you're going to have a bit more involved, some writing there on the screen. If you've got a phone and a tablet, you're probably not going to be able to see it, so best to watch on a TV. Get your telly set up. I'm sure you can get YouTube on your TV. If you're particularly interested in maybe picking up one of these amplifiers or sorting through them to one that you want to pick up, if you're not that interested in what I'm saying about them, it's probably going to be enough. But I think if you're looking for one of these, it's well worth getting it up on the telly and reading the actual review. Now the amplifiers today are reviewed by a bloke called U-Fool. Now I don't know a lot about him, but apparently if you do look him up, he's held in quite high regard, and he's done, like I say, a lot of reviews for HiFi Choice, and he's held in high regard back in the days back then. So I think it's well worth listening to and having a look at. So here we go. Like I say, right at the end you're going to get a little chart of what I've read out and some more specs. That's right at the end about all the amplifiers. But like I say, every amplifier's got its own little sheet, own pages, shall we say, that you can look at as we go through them. So here they are, and I'll say thanks for watching now, and I'll see you all soon.
Okay, the first amplifier we're going to look at is this Akai AM-2600, and this retailed at £199. With the overall distortion rating being good, noise from the eye-level inputs being good, noise from the phono inputs being good, and a dynamic range also being good, with a write-up saying that this amplifier has slightly restricted facilities, but works well into both 4 ohms and 8 ohm loudspeakers, and is very good value for money. Okay, the next amplifier is the Alpha FA600, retailing at £100, and we've got distortion here being poor, overall distortion being poor, noise from the eye-level inputs being poor, noise from the phono inputs being average, and the dynamic range being average. With the write-up saying, with such a poorly powered bandwidth, distortion performance and eye-level input noise, this model cannot be recommended. Next amplifier is the Armstrong 621, and this particular amplifier retailed for £130 back then. And we've got the overall distortion being average, noise from the eye-level inputs being poor, noise from the phono inputs being good, and the dynamic range being average. With the write-up of this particular amplifier, with a poor performance on the eye-level input noise and the power bandwidth only being 3 kHz, this model cannot be recommended. Next model is the Audiotronics LA-4040, retailing at £110. We've got the overall distortion being average, the noise from the eye-level inputs being poor, noise from the phono inputs being good, and the dynamic range being average. And the write-up here is, although its distortion performance and power bandwidth were adequate, the low-pass filter and the standard of the internal constructions were poor. Okay, the next amplifier we come to is the A&R, Cambridge A&R A60, and this retailed for £125. And we've got the overall distortion being good, the noise from the eye-level inputs being very good, noise from the phono inputs being average, and the dynamic range being good. And the write-up here is very well constructed, with a low-pass filter and good performance on eye-level input noise, recommended, and it's British too. Okay, the next amplifier is the Cambridge Audio P80. This retailed for £185, so nearly in the £200 bracket. So okay, the overall distortion rating was average. The noise from the eye level inputs was poor. Noise from the phono inputs was average, and the dynamic range was poor. And the write up here is suffered from a power bandwidth of only 4 kHz, and taking into account the average noise performance, poor HiFi filter, it cannot be recommended. Okay, the next amplifier is the Eagle A6400, retailing at £110. With the overall distortion being poor, eye level noise from the inputs, noise from the eye level inputs being poor, noise from the phono inputs being poor, dynamic range being poor. Of course, the write up here is not going to be too great, and it isn't. It says due to the eye distortion, very poor input and output noise, and restricted power bandwidth, it cannot be recommended. So maybe no surprises on that particular unit there. Okay, the next unit is the Armstrong A401. This retailed at £99, so not a lot of money back then from Armstrong. With the overall distortion being average, the noise from the eye level inputs being good, noise from the phono inputs being good, and the dynamic range being average. The write up here was basically a simple cheap amplifier, but suffers from an excessive eye impedance at the DIN socket, a limited power bandwidth, and the odd volume setting, which upsets the amplifier balance. Okay, we move on to an Hitachi. This is the Hitachi HA-330. This retailed at £124. We've got the overall distortion rating being average, the noise from the eye level inputs being good, noise from the phono inputs being poor, and the dynamic range being average. And we've got a little write up here saying the phono input noise was poor, the meters were unnecessary, and the steps on the volume and tone controls were too large at some settings, so cannot be recommended. Okay, the next amplifier I move on to is the cheapest out the lot. This just comes in at £85. It's the JVC JA-S11. And we look at the specifications here, the bits and pieces. We've got the overall distortion rating being average, the noise from the eye level inputs being very good, noise from the phono inputs being good, and the dynamic range being good. With a write-up saying this is the cheapest model reviewed. It's a basic amplifier with no filters, but the bass is sensibly rolled off with a good noise performance, and it can be recommended. Okay, the next amplifier is the JVC JA-S31. So this retailed at £120, and we've got the overall distortion being average, the noise from the eye level inputs being very good, noise from the phono inputs being very good, and the dynamic range being good. And the write up here saying offers 40 watts per channel into 8 ohms as a good noise performance. Although distortion was only average, at its price it was clean and a well-made amplifier that can be recommended. Okay, the next amplifier is the Lenco A50, retailing at £174, with the overall distortion being poor, the noise from the eye level inputs being average, noise from the phono inputs being poor, and the dynamic range being average. So the Lenco A50 had a write-up with such poor filters, distortion performance and eye level input noise, this model cannot be recommended, and that retailed £174. Okay, now we move on to the Marantz 1030, and this retailed at £90. So we've got the overall distortion being average, the noise from the eye level inputs being poor, noise from the phono inputs being very good, and the dynamic range being average. And we've got a write up here. It's only £5 more expensive than the recommended JVC JA-S11. It only offers 15 watts per channel and suffers from poor high level noise input. So that's the Marantz 1030 there. Okay, the next amplifier I move on to is the Marantz 1070, and this retailed at £145, with the overall distortion being good, noise from the eye level inputs being good, noise from the phono inputs being good, and the dynamic range being good. And we've got a write up here for about £45 more than its brother, or its younger sibling, the 1030. This model offers filters and presence control and is recommended. So that's the 1070 there by Marantz. Okay, the next unit is the Pioneer SA 6500 Mark II, retailing at £150. This unit here, overall distortion being average, noise from the eye level inputs being very good, noise from the phono inputs being good, and a dynamic range being very good. And this Pioneer gets a right upper, offers a good level and pickup noise, performance, but lacks filters. Nevertheless, is a worthy consideration and is recommended. So that's this Pioneer SA6500 marked. Okay, the next unit we've got is a Rotel RA-413, retailing £100. And this particular Rotel has an overall distortion which is good. The noise from the eye level inputs is average. Noise from the phono inputs is good. And the dynamic range is average. And it says, although a cheap amplifier, the filters were not particularly good and the noise distortion were rather poor. Sorry, the noise distortion performance, should I say, was rather poor on this particular Rotel. Next up is the Sansui AU-3900, retailing £107. With the overall distortion being good, the noise from the eye level inputs being good, noise from the phono inputs being average, and the dynamic range being good. And the right up here is with a reasonable low pass filter, and also as a built-in bass roll-off and an adequate distortion and noise performance. This amplifier is very good value for money at its price and is a best buy, as we can see there. Okay, next up is a Sanyo DCA-1001, retailing at £120. And the overall distortion here is good. Noise from the eye level inputs is very good. Noise from the phono inputs is average, and the dynamic range is good. The right up here is saying that the Sanyo DCA-1001, the power rating of 50 watts per channel into 8 ohms, the reasonable distortion and noise performance, and the adequate high pass filter make this a very good value money amplifier for its price. And as you can see, that comes up as a best buy as well. Okay, next we've got a Sony TA-2650, if you want to say it that way. Okay, we're a typical price of £135 back then. We've got the overall distortion rate being good, noise from the eye level inputs being good, noise from the phono inputs being average, and the dynamic range also being average. With a right up here, suffers from a high level output noise, especially on headphones, and has limited facilities and no filters. So that's the Sony TA2600. Okay, we move up in the range. This is the Sony TA3650, retailing £190, so near the top end bracket there of the price comparison we're doing here today, with the overall distortion rating being very good, the noise from the eye level inputs being very good, noise from the phono inputs being average, and the dynamic range being good. With a right up here saying the overall performance was reasonable, but with main zoom was a problem, especially when listening through headphones, in addition to poor crosstalk between inputs. So that's the Sony TA3650. Okay, the next amplifier moved on to is a Sugden A48, and back then this retailed at £165. With the overall distortion rating being poor, the noise from the eye level inputs being average, noise from the phono inputs being average, and the dynamic range being average. And the write up on this particular amplifier is with an exceptionally poor power bandwidth and poor distortion performance. This model cannot be recommended. Okay, next up is a Technics SU-7300, retailing at £130. With the overall distortion being good, the noise from the eye level inputs being good, noise from the phono inputs being very good, and the dynamic range being good. And when we look over to the right up of this particular amplifier, we've got offers a low pass filter and adequate power rating and generally reasonable performance. This model can be recommended, although there were some problems with this particular amplifier. So there you go, that's the 7300 there by Technics. Okay, now we're moving up a few models by Technics here. The SU7700, retailing £160. With the overall distortion being good, the noise from the eye level inputs being good, noise from the phono inputs being good, and the dynamic range also being good. If I can just squeeze this bit of paper across, a good performance for its price, and it can be recommended. So this is the 7700. Okay, we've got a Toshiba SB420 coming up next, £145 price tag back then, and we've got the overall distortion being very good, the noise from the eye level inputs being very good, noise from the phono inputs being average, and our dynamic range being good. And if we look at the actual write-up on this can be recommended for its general reasonable performance for its price, but the filters were not so good. So there you go, that is the Toshiba SB420. Next up is a Trio KA-3500, with the overall distortion rating being poor, the noise from the eye level inputs being good, noise from the phono inputs being average, and our dynamic range being good. And this Trio write-up went as follows: noise performance was good, and the low pass filter was sensible, but there were a few problems with the controls and distortion. So that's the Trio 3500. And now we move on to the Trio KA7100, with overall distortion being good, noise from the eye level inputs being very good, noise from the phono inputs being good, and the dynamic range being very good. With the write-up saying, although slightly overpriced for its few facilities, this model can be recommended for its very good measurement performance. So that's the KA7100 there by Trio. Okay, the last amplifier, a sigh of relief from everyone now. This is the Yamaha CA-610, with the overall distortion rating being very good, the noise from the eye level inputs being very good, the noise from the phono inputs being good, being average, the phono inputs average, and the dynamic range being good. Forgot to mention this retailed £155, with the write-up saying incorporating a rather unnecessary meters and with no low pass filter. This amplifier does however offer a good performance at its price and can be recommended. So there you go, that is the Yamaha CA-610.